They called him El Deseado, the desired one. But by the end of his life, Spaniards were spitting his name like venom. Ferdinand VII of Spain wasn't just a bad king, he was a curse in royal flesh. The kind of monarch that made you wonder if the Bourbon family tree should have been cut down and burned for firewood. Because Ferdinand wasn't just inept, he was cruel, vindictive, selfish, and soaked in scandal from head to syphilitic toe. Let's dive into the tragicomic clusterfuck that was Ferdinand VII's reign, where politics, betrayal, and raw sexual obsession spiraled together into one of the most disastrous episodes in Spanish history. Born in 1784, Ferdinand was the eldest surviving son of Charles IV and Maria Luisa of Parma, a queen with a sexual reputation that made Versailles look like a convent. It was whispered across Europe that Ferdinand might not even be Charles's son. Court gossip pinned Manuel de Godoy, the queen's favorite, and possibly her lover, as the real daddy. Either way, Ferdinand grew up in a palace dripping in intrigue, backstabbing, and excess. From a young age, he was lazy, manipulative, and entitled. He despised his father, loathed Godoy, and plotted behind everyone's back. He wasn't reading philosophy or leading armies. He was busy jerking off to power fantasies and palace maids. He surrounded himself with flatterers and cowards, people who told him exactly what he wanted to hear. His education was shallow, focused more on royal etiquette and ceremonial pomp than real governance or statecraft. He saw the throne not as a duty, but as a plaything. And guess what? The Spanish people still rallied around him. They hated Godoy and Charles IV even more, so they placed their hopes in this sneaky little snake, believing he'd be Spain's salvation. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. In 1808, when Spain was already falling apart, Ferdinand pulled off a palace coup. Charles IV abdicated, and Ferdinand became king. But just weeks later, Napoleon Bonaparte, yes, that Napoleon, invited Ferdinand to Bayonne. Like a gullible idiot, Ferdinand went, thinking he'd be showered with imperial blessings. Instead, Napoleon slapped him, mocked him, and forced him to give up the throne. Then he shoved Ferdinand into exile in France like a humiliated schoolboy. While Spain burned in his absence, Ferdinand played the role of martyr. He wrote letters dripping in false humility, pretending to be the savior of the Spanish people while doing absolutely nothing to help them. He let others fight and die in his name while he ate well, slept comfortably, and schemed for a return to power. The Peninsular War erupted. Hundreds of thousands died. Guerrilla warfare spread. The Spanish people fought like demons to kick out the French, while Ferdinand lounged in French chateaux, painting himself as a victim. When the war finally ended in 1814 and Napoleon was defeated, Ferdinand returned to Spain. The crowds roared. He promised to uphold the liberal constitution of 1812, the one Spain had drafted in his absence. Then, in a move so bold and gutless it deserves its own chapter in How to Be a Tyrant, Ferdinand instantly tore up the constitution, crushed the liberals, and declared himself an absolute monarch again. Spain had bled for 6 years, and this bastard waltzed back in and acted like he'd done them a favor. He immediately reinstated reactionary policies and set the tone for a reign soaked in betrayal and oppression. Ferdinand's reign from 1814 to 1833 was one long bloody grind of censorship, torture, and reactionary chaos. Liberals were hunted like dogs, universities were shut down, the Inquisition was damn near revived. He ran Spain like a paranoid pimp, surrounded by spies, clinging to the clergy, and making sure every dissenting voice got a bullet or a noose. Secret police patrolled the cities, informants filled taverns, writers, professors, even priests who spoke a word of criticism were tortured or disappeared. His court became a grotesque theater of fear and decadence. Instead of rebuilding Spain, Ferdinand reveled in autocracy. He preferred grand balls and orgies to governing. He threw gold at sycophants while soldiers went unpaid and cities crumbled. Reforms were blocked, infrastructure neglected, and poverty deepened. People didn't just suffer, they regressed. Ferdinand dragged Spain backward while the rest of Europe tried to limp into modernity. He was obsessed with control, terrified of reform, and allergic to anything resembling progress. And while the country fell deeper into misery, Ferdinand was busy fucking, literally. Let's not dance around it. Ferdinand VII had a libido as bloated as his belly. The man was a sexual volcano, erupting everywhere, and on anyone who caught his bloodshot eye. He wasn't charming, he was repulsive, overweight, chronically ill, with a face like a moldy pear, but the crown made him irresistible to a certain class of opportunists. He married 4 times, Maria Antonia of Naples, a smart and sharp woman who loathed him. Their marriage was cold and she died young, possibly poisoned. Maria Isabel of Portugal, a sweet woman who bore him a daughter who died in infancy. She herself died soon after, reportedly due to complications from childbirth. Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony. She was 15 when she married Ferdinand. He was 42. She was so terrified by sex that she refused him for 2 years. He eventually forced her. The girl withered under him, dying without children. Maria Cristina of the 2 Sicilies, his final wife. She was also young, but at least this one gave him a daughter, Isabella. But marriage wasn't enough. Ferdinand kept mistresses, fucked maids, and pursued women with the grace of a drunk boor. One noblewoman described him as having the morals of a goat and the appetite of a sultan. He was known to ask his ministers to bring him virgins as gifts, court officials obliged, of course. You didn't say no to a king in a country where saying the wrong thing could get your tongue nailed to a post. He'd boast about his conquests. Palace gossip spoke of orgies with actresses, of chambermaids being summoned in the dead of night, of noble daughters coerced into silence. He turned the palace into a sex-fueled cesspool. Behind the velvet curtains of royal opulence lay one of the most grotesque scenes of abuse, indulgence, and unchecked lust that any European court had seen since the fall of Caligula. By the 1820s, Ferdinand was a mess. Physically, sexually, and politically, he suffered from obesity, gout, and some say syphilis. His legs were so swollen that walking was agony. He shuffled through the palace, groaning, farting, and screaming at servants. His breath stank of rot, his flesh sagged like melted wax, and his voice was a slurred croak of threats and whimpers. Meanwhile, Spain was tearing apart. Revolutions boiled in the colonies. Argentina, Mexico, Colombia, all breaking away. Ferdinand tried to crush the independence movements with force, but it was too late. He'd lost it all. His colonial officers were corrupt, underfunded, and disloyal. He sent troops to die in jungles and deserts while clinging to fantasies of imperial glory. He couldn't adapt, couldn't inspire, couldn't lead. He just issued decrees from his stinking palace while the empire collapsed around him. Spain went from a global empire to a sad, shrinking island of misery, all under Ferdinand's rotten rule. He reinstated absolutism again in 1823, thanks to help from French troops. And for 10 more years, he ruled with iron and ignorance, torturing liberals, censoring thought, fucking whatever he could. He aged like spoiled meat, wrinkled, bitter, and riddled with disease. Ferdinand had no sons, just one daughter, Isabella. But Spanish law, the Salic law, prevented women from inheriting the throne. So Ferdinand changed the law in 1830, allowing his daughter to become queen. This royally pissed off his brother, Don Carlos, who believed he was the rightful heir. Don Carlos had supporters, reactionaries, ultra-Catholics, hardliners. They saw Isabella as the product of a corrupt court and an unfit female monarch. When Ferdinand finally died in 1833, drenched in piss, pus, and prayer, the kingdom didn't mourn. They exhaled, but the damage was done. His death kicked off the Carlist Wars, a brutal civil conflict that would plague Spain for decades. Conservatives rallied behind Don Carlos. Liberals and moderates backed Isabella. The country, already broken, now bled from within. His death didn't bring peace, it unleashed chaos. His final legacy was division, war, and instability. All thanks to the selfish, sleazy, bloated disaster of a man named Ferdinand VII. Let's not sugarcoat this. Ferdinand VII was one of the worst monarchs Spain ever had, and that's saying something in a dynasty full of lunatics and degenerates. He betrayed his people, destroyed his country's constitution, sold out to Napoleon, lost an empire, fucked half the palace, and left his kingdom in civil war. There was no vision, no love for country, no sense of duty. Just pure ego, paranoia, and the desperate need to dominate women, liberals, and anyone who dared challenge him. His legacy? Ruin, repression, regression. He was a leech on the body of Spain, sucking its blood, poisoning its future, and leaving behind nothing but scars. Historians call him reactionary. The people called him the felon king. But maybe the best title comes from a Spanish liberal in exile who once wrote, "Ferdinand VII did not reign. He decomposed, and with that, Spain did too."